Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the final double header of the season covering the Brussels and Sint Niklaas and the X2O trophy in Brussels. Issam, thank you for being here.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
Let's start in Brussels with the men elite race. In the first lap, Toon Aerts was feeling very strong, very eager to leave a mark, but as he was in the lead, he made a mistake in the second lap. Coming by pit 1, he overshot the corner, went into the fences, crashed and never featured at the front of the race. His position up front was claimed by Michael Vanthourenhout, who rode away. He opened a 10-15 second gap over the chasers, where Joris Nieuwenhuis had taken the lead after an early crash. Nieuwenhuis eventually bridged across to Vanthourenhout. The two spent probably 30-ish minutes of the race, kind of just looking at each other, no major attacks. In the final lap, Vanthourenhout attacked on the big off-camber. He opened the gap. Nieuwenhuis came back, but Vanthourenhout had the upper hand in the technical sections and eventually took victory, ending a drought of a month and a half. Last win for Paul Sauze was on the 1st of January. He took the win. Nieuwenhuis came second, with Van der Haar finishing third. It was quite straightforward, Issam. It was clear that these two riders were the strongest on the day. The course here is quite technical, but at the same time requires quite a bit of power. There's a number of climbs around the campus there, quite some steep ones. But ultimately for Vanthourenhout, the technical skills made the difference. He was a bit better on the off-camber, but what was especially remarkable was in the section which they call the amphitheater, kind of the steps, the downhill washboard pump track. Because he's a dirty side dismounter, he could really hang next to his bike and then hop off at the right moment. A nice advantage to have for somebody who normally is having a disadvantage because he's a lefty.
I would say that was some ways decisive, and but overall I think that Vanthourenhout was a bit superior compared to the rest technically, and just mainly in that just turning around and the slow speed corners, and then he comes out, accelerating quite well. When he dismounts, he doesn't lose that much time either, and I think that for Vanthourenhout, the moment he had that opportunity, it looked quite good, and it was for Nieuwenhuis, it was going to be a difficult task. I mean, during the race itself, I got a different impression, I have to say, because I thought that Nieuwenhuis, he looked quite good. And I thought that despite the fact that maybe Vanthourenhout had his advantages here and there, that Nieuwenhuis, probably the one with the better legs, and could utilize that. But I think that Vanthourenhout also today just had a very good day, was probably very motivated because he wanted to bring that win for Paul Sauze. And yeah, he was able to pull it off on a tricky course, and he made it look very simple at times. And I think that is that was a strength of his today, that he was able to negotiate the course quite well.
Vanthourenhout said he was eager to at least get one more victory this season. He was in good form, hoped to do really well at the World Championships, but was sick. That influenced him last week as well. But now he ends his season with a good result here. Of course, he's still racing next week, but he didn't seem to have high expectations for the more sandy course in Oostmalle. Yesterday in Sint Niklaas, he was also doing quite decently. He finished on the podium. Of course, that isn't per se a great Vanthourenhout course. I do agree with you. I also had the impression that Nieuwenhuis had a bit more left in the tank, but ultimately he also couldn't really utilize that in the final lap, right in the ditch which was added to the course. The first passage through that one, he kind of went sideways a little bit and needed to chase. There were a few sections where he could really put the hammer down and put the power out. The acting director for Paul Sauze on the day was Mario de Klerk, and de Klerk just kept urging Vanthourenhout needs to wait, he needs to be patient, he needs to wait, he needs to be patient. In the final lap, it kind of all worked out for him. He had Nieuwenhuis under pressure on all the technical sections. I don't know if he waited long enough for de Klerk. Probably not. De Klerk said he should attack after the barriers. He didn't leave it that late, but yeah, it is, I think, in the end, a solid race for Vanthourenhout in a solid weekend. Nieuwenhuis, how do you think he's looking? In the interview post-race, it was kind of hard to really sense how he was feeling. He was like, well, yeah, I was sick, I won last week, whatever. He seemed quite, not necessarily disappointed today, but reflecting a bit on his season, he didn't seem all too happy, of course. It was a bit of a strange interview. Did you think so?
Yeah, well, it's difficult, I think, because he probably, he was on quite a high last year, and I think that just he will probably come out of this season thinking, well, what could have been? Because we definitely saw certain moments this season in which you saw a newer house from last season and someone that was able to maintain that, and we know that if he's able to reach that level, he's arguably one that will be fighting for best of the rest behind the Vandeputte and Van Aert. It's hard to judge. He probably senses maybe a need of trying to win the races that are left. It's, as you say, it was a bit hard to judge what he really was thinking, and for me at least, I would judge it as someone that is probably quite that has the feeling that what could have been this season, and that is definitely a feeling that is definitely very hard to let go. But I think very soon he will be focusing on the preparation for next season. He will do a gravel campaign, which is going to be interesting to follow, and I think he needs to do everything he can to make sure that he is in good form next season. And I think if he's able to reach a similar form from this season and especially last season, then a lot will be possible. But yeah, it's very hard to judge, and he went through a lot, because you have to remember his preparation going towards this season, not being healthy, and then having to delay his return that was supposed to be in Antwerp, the first World Cup race. And I think it's just, many things have happened that didn't go his way this season, and who knows, maybe he was reflecting at that moment.
We will keep the reflecting for a bit later. We're going to record a number of team review podcasts after the season ends. But another rider that normally should have been in the mix up front here was Toon Aerts. He made a really, really strong impression early in the race. I thought it was perhaps a matter of time before he would break away. I didn't necessarily think it would be a super long solo, but I did think that he had really, really good legs today. It was unfortunate to see him make that mistake, and yeah, I can't help but again just be a little bit critical of Toon Aerts. These are the number of mistakes on not the most challenging corners of the course that have cost him too many times, not just this season, throughout his entire career. I'm happy that he is not too hurt. It was a nasty crash, also a strange one where he fell and then the fences came on top of him. He had a bit of pain in his elbow. He managed to fight back to a 7th place. Yesterday he was also up there in Sint Niklaas, finishing 4th. That's where he restarted last year. What do you think Aerts could have done today?
Well, I'm still thinking about what you said in the summary. He wanted to leave a mark, but I think he left a mark, but not the mark that he wanted to leave behind, and it was probably more on his body than in the race itself. But I think that for Aerts, I think that he was a bit too eager, and really wanted to make the difference in which is hard on this course. It's very hard to make a difference, and it's very hard to come back. I mean, I think we're going to circle maybe to Vanthourenhout, but you could see with that chase, for example, that it's so difficult to close a gap. You just hang on with around like the 1-2 seconds that you will gain here, and then you lose it elsewhere on the course. So I think for Aerts, he was very motivated, but I think he could have used his legs a little bit different. It was a mistake, in a way silly. It can happen to the best, because it was a tricky course, let's be honest, but it felt to me like he was overdoing it a little bit, and it looked to me like someone that went through the corner just a little bit too fast and was on the wrong end of that corner in the end, and that cost him the race. I guess it's hard to judge if that was going to be for a win, but I can definitely make a case for Aerts fighting for a podium spot. So he is also one of those riders that still wants to make this season come to an end in a very good way, in a positive way. He wants to win a race, and I think that it wasn't meant to be for this weekend, and we will see what will happen next weekend. Last opportunity for Aerts arguably as well, if he came through this race without any big injuries, which I don't think he really did. And we will see what will happen next week, because he will definitely be motivated to try and snatch that win super, super late in the season.
He has one win in Otegem, but what he's looking for is a televised win, especially one in a classified cross, is what he said. That's out of the question now. Perhaps next year he can do it. He, at least in the beginning of the season, doesn't need to start from 0 points. So that's definitely a positive for him. Behind the eventual top two of Vanthourenhout and Nieuwenhuis, we found Van der Haar. He was hanging quite close by, then just couldn't close those final 5 to 10 seconds. Every time he came close, Vanthourenhout and Nieuwenhuis accelerated. They didn't want to have him in the mix. Yesterday, after a slow start, he moved forward as well, and Sint Niklaas finished second. There, Vandeputte was long gone. We'll talk about him in just a moment. Overall, a solid weekend for Van der Haar, getting a few podiums. He had a good season start, but secretly he hasn't had that bad of a season. He's been quite consistent, usually up there. Just those highs which he had at the beginning of the season when a few other riders weren't in form quite yet, those haven't really been there. We shouldn't be surprised that he's good right now in the season. He's often quite good at the very tail end of the season. He is experienced, he's relatively old, so he can carry the load of the season. It doesn't hamper him as much as riders who aren't used to that. A solid weekend, but 2 days that he never really was in contention for the victory, although he seemed quite content, and he should probably be. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Behind Vanthourenhout, Nieuwenhuis and Van der Haar we have Issam. 5th place went to Niels Vandeputte ahead of Felipe Orts. 7th place for Toon Aerts ahead of Jente Michels, Cameron Mason in 9th and Anton Ferdinand in 10th. Quite a lot of flat tires today. There was some section after pit 2, just before the start finish. Mason had a flat tire there. Michels had a flat tire there. Issam had a flat tire there. Kamp had a flat tire. I believe Zweek also punctured. The one of Issam was perhaps most influential. He could have potentially featured for the third podium spot if it wasn't for that flat tire. He's the winner of the overall series. But the man of the weekend that we should discuss here, Issam, is Vandeputte. Today, not that special. Had a few hiccups. Yesterday, though, start to finish lead, dominant performance. Really special ride by him in Sint Niklaas. He was the first onto the steep bank right after the start finish. From there he took off. People took their turns in the chase, but by the time they really started chasing, Vandeputte had a 20-second lead, which went north of a minute at some point.
Yeah, and I think he made good use of the guys behind not really wanting to put it all on the line to get back to him. And at one point it became really clear that Vandeputte was probably going to take it, and all props to him, because I think that he had a very good start. He made good use of that, and then when he went away, there was not really much the others could do. They tried, as you say, they tried to chase a little bit, but eventually when the urge was really there, the gap was too big, I guess. Especially this late in the season with the courses that we have right now presented to us, they are definitely courses in which, if the circumstances are there, making a difference is not going to be that easy. And I wouldn't say he got it as a present, but if they just lap after lap, they give you just a little bit more time, and you are just basically all alone. For you, it doesn't really matter the effort that you're going to put in. You get it back, and there's not really someone in your wheel. And for the others, it's just a bit overkill when you're going to put in the effort. There's always going to be someone just a little smarter than you sitting in your wheel, and I guess no one really wanted to be that guy to close the gap, and which was very understandable, and that gave Vandeputte the win. And I think, as you say, it was for Vandeputte. He was the smartest. He had very good legs, and he made use of that. And it was, for someone like him, racing in Brussels is just going to be a bit different because you already have that win. And it takes a bit of the load away, and I think that he was, he's going to be quite satisfied with his weekend.
A final thing I would like to point out, or maybe two actually. First of all, Jente Michels before that puncture was actually having a quite good race. He was up there fighting for the 4th spot with Issam. That was a high for him. He has had an up and down season. He didn't race last weekend. I think he was a bit sick, so this is definitely a positive for him, despite that puncture finishing 8th. And then secondly, Felipe Orts, solid weekend, 6th and 7th place. I thought he could have perhaps done a little bit more. He clearly doesn't have that form that he had in November when he got the podium in Niel. This course is quite similar to Niel. It's the one technical feature after the other. If you see a course like this, it's typically designed by Vervekken. There's just an overkill of features. For that, I also don't like this course. It's too much. It's feature to feature. Often, quite some of them are silly. The big off-camber is great, and I'll touch on that a bit more. But like this downhill with the kind of these tiny stones before the V corner into a big drop with the holes, the amphitheater with the downhill washboard which becomes a run and is just almost entirely worth running. I'm not a big fan. The happiest moment of my day was when the X2O trophy said they were considering reforming for next year, also potentially stepping away or adjusting the time-based system because they realized what we've been saying a few years, that it isn't working. But I shouldn't be that negative, Issam. The racing today, especially on the women's side, was quite good. There was some turnout. We've seen way worse here. Still not my favorite classification or my favorite race, but we've seen worse, and certainly yesterday in Sint Niklaas with Vandeputte going all out, like start to finish domination, then this is a welcome adjustment. Although, of course, yesterday the women's race was great, but the highlight of the men's race was probably that hot air balloon landing in the lake.
Well, I guess for me, the highlight of the day was we are at the end of the season right now, and I guess the motivation is at times a bit lower to get behind the TV and watch the races, but the hype that the mascot, the duck, on the podium has in the X2O trophy in Brussels, I mean, I cannot replicate, the dancing and the movements that duck was making. It was at times, it was hilarious to see, to be honest. I mean, if you didn't watch it, just check out the podium ceremony there and you will see it. It is, it's quite some humor in it. That was, for me, at least, the highlight. And the racing itself, I think on the women's side, we saw, both in Brussels and Sint Niklaas, we saw some very good racing. I was actually quite entertained.
Let's talk about that women's racing. First, yesterday in Sint Niklaas on the beach. It was entertaining. We had kind of the same riders as last week in Lille, apart from the fact that Casasola was more up there, so it's more the same riders as in Middelkerke. Casasola, Vandeputte and Brandt. And Casasola had really, really good legs and also good technical skills. On the backside of the course, on the off-cambers, he was consistently able to put Brandt under pressure. Brandt, however, had two weapons. One was the fact that she was jumping the barriers, which was the first time she did so in competition. This gained her roughly 2 seconds each lap. And because she was chasing, those seconds proved valuable. After that, her second weapon was the sand section. As they came onto the beach, they made this half circle before a left-hander. She was much, much better than Casasola, who we know struggles there. That eventually made the difference, because in the final lap, Brandt slipped on one of the off-cambers, needed to chase, but came back along the barriers. Casasola did really, really, really good. She fought really hard for her position, but ultimately had to see Brandt at the latest of moments overtake her going into the sand. Therefore, Brandt took the victory, but it was a good battle. Apart from that, Casasola's sand skills are obviously lacking. I don't think she did too much wrong. She can use a bit more experience racing at the front. Perhaps Crelan Corendon could have used a bit more team tactics early on to put Brandt under pressure, but I would stand by that. It's considering her skill level, a near perfect ride.
Today, or at least the whole weekend, she had very good legs, and I think it was very visible in both Sint Niklaas and also in Brussels. And I feel in Sint Niklaas with the sand, it was just very tricky, I guess, because she didn't really find the way through the sand and lost quite some time. And I think that, considering that, it's just going to be very hard to beat a Brandt that is always going to be motivated. I mean, I don't know how she's able to do it, but even so late in the season, she still tries to do new things. And I guess, these are somewhat the races that you have to try and implement certain certain tricks and all that, you're not gonna lose the classification with that. You just have to make sure that you don't break something with a nasty fall, and thankfully that wasn't the case. And you know, I commend her for that. I commend her for trying things, because I think that it is, at times we have certain courses in which the barriers are not that high. I feel like that you saw it also in Sint Niklaas. There was definitely some time to be gained with her jumping the barriers, and despite the fact that it is still slow and at times it didn't look the greatest, but it is something in which you can practice on. We have seen it. If you put in the hours and if you start practicing early, it will be something that you eventually will much better under control. And we have seen it that certain riders that are very good on the barriers sometimes also make mistakes, so the mistakes will always be made in the end. But I think it was interesting to see, and it was a shame for Casasola that she was not able to get that win there. But with the information that we obviously have of today, that she was able to win it in Brussels, I don't think that was a big problem after today.
I thought Brandt's jumping looked relatively good, but what I admire most is that despite her age, she's turning 36 this year, that she still is looking to add tools to her toolbox to win races. I would argue that yesterday, without the bunny hops, she would have not been able to win, because she wouldn't have been able to close the gap to Casasola the way she did in the final lap. Casasola has two things to work on. One she can work on over the summer a bit, her sand skills. The second one will come the more she races at the front of these races, and she's already become considerably better at them, and that's racecraft, race awareness, experience in these situations. That will naturally come, and as said, has already improved. In fact, we could see that today in Brussels, where we had a similar battle but also slightly different. Casasola had a flat in the first lap, took her about 15 minutes to recover, but then she was at the front with Vandeputte. They dropped Ribeyrolles and Brandt, and then in the second half of the race, unfortunately Vandeputte had a flat tire, fell back, and then in the final lap she also crashed and had to go to the hospital. I have not seen an update as of now. Casasola was left alone up front, but in the penultimate lap she made a mistake on the big off-camber. She came on the lowest line, struggled for grip. Ribeyrolles, who had at that point dropped Brandt with a phenomenal line over the off-camber the lap before, repeated that phenomenal line, took the race lead. Casasola managed to come back, and in the final lap Casasola consistently put Ribeyrolles under pressure. This is where that racecraft showed. Early in the lap, she took the lead onto the first big climb of the lap. That opened a 3-4 second gap on Ribeyrolles. Ribeyrolles came back, but at that point when she came back, they were already at the off-camber. Casasola was in front. That meant Ribeyrolles couldn't utilize her line. She was blocked. Casasola tactically positioned herself to be first going into the amphitheater as well. Here on the running and remounting, she was a bit better. There she opened a small gap, and then despite going very, very cautiously through the final 5-6 corners of the course, allowing Ribeyrolles to come back from 6-7 seconds down, she took the win, becoming the first non-Dutch winner in the X2O trophy since Clara Honsinger on the Koppenberg 2021. She's the first Italian winner of a major classified cross since Arzuffi in Boom 2019. It was a long overdue victory. And she was also stronger today. Ribeyrolles was really carried by that off-camber, which is very valid. The line she took, the highest of the lines, was by far the best. All the men elite were taking it, but from the woman, Ribeyrolles was the only one able to ride it, and it yielded big dividends today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it was, this course is definitely one in which I think that Casasola has her difficulties in a way, but you could also see that in terms of her base technique, there is not much wrong, and she's able to attack the course quite well. But yeah, I think overall she was negotiating the course quite well, was in a very good position, had good legs, and I think that all that played a huge role in eventually being in the position she was. And it was for Ribeyrolles obviously a very compromising situation to be in, to be chasing, and then finally being able to get back in the last lap and be in a position where you might have a chance. But I think at that point, I guess the good legs of Casasola were just, that it was just a bit too difficult for Ribeyrolles to make something happen for her, and you don't really get an opportunity at that point. And I feel that it all somewhat came together for Casasola, in which, Ribeirol just had just that little bit more of a struggle to get it all together in the final lap. And I feel that obviously her chasing and trying to get back in that position didn't help didn't help her case of trying to go for victory. And the thing that I had with this race really was that I think that for Casasola it shouldn't have been that close. I think that I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been a battle, but I feel that she left it maybe a little bit too close. There were some opportunities in which she probably could have won a little bit more comfortably. I don't think that Ribeirol should have had a chance to get back, but hey, that was how the racing went, and eventually it went her way. So it's not a dramatic ending in a way, and she didn't lose anything out of it. It was just a bit closer, but she still got away with the win.
I think in the final lap it could have been less close. The level of caution that Casasola was taking through the final corners was very, very big. That's more than necessary. She should have just taken them as if they were any other corner in any other lap. But apart from that, she made one mistake. She had that slip up on the tricky off-camber in the penultimate lap, which really allowed Ribeirol to take 15 seconds back. Don't forget that Casasola had a puncture early on, which took quite long for her to recover from moving through the field on this Mickey Mouse course. So I get that the way that it turned out the way it turned out. I am a bit more critical of Ribeirol. The technical ability of Ribeirol was good. As said, on the off-camber, she was the only one to nail the highest line, with the highest amount of speed. I don't think in the final lap she had an opportunity to reach that off-camber first. However, that off-camber line was skill-based. She was the only one with the skills to ride that line. The off-camber was genius in a way, because in these conditions, the first part, for plenty of the women, it would have been a safer option to run it. However, you can't run it, because then you also need to run the big climb afterwards, and that's pretty much just suicide. Your race would be over. That's skill-based, that section. The other technical sections, I did not like the adaptability of Ribeirol. She kept riding alternative lines, which were at most not slower. But they were certainly not faster, even though it costs extra energy to go the extra meters. It's funny because Ribeirol was racing Casasola, and Casasola has a degree in maths. And I remember high school maths, Pythagoras, short line, long line. Whatever way, you should know that after the barriers, Ribeirol goes further miles. She nearly goes outside of Brussels before hitting the turn and coming back. Yes, she can gain a bit more speed, but you could see that she needed to accelerate much more to get back onto the wheel of Casasola than Casasola, who just remounted and got up to speed. Similar in this 180 onto the off-camber, where you could kind of see the track and field course. There were plenty of these lines where Ribeirol didn't show adaptability, whereas Casasola did. Casasola tried riding the left-hand curve uphill out of the amphitheater towards the end of the course in the first lap, then switched to running. In the penultimate lap, she saw Ribeirol run the downhill before that. She copied that in the final lap. That's good adaptability, whereas Ribeirol, who was in the wheel of riders quite a bit, should have realized that her lines, despite maybe working if it had been more muddy, weren't working in the conditions that they were right there. Yes, she got kind of handed the situation in which she was competing for the win, but she could have done more with that had her adaptability been better. That said, Brand here, Issam, I think we can kind of conclude that the tiredness is really kicking in. I've understood that she's not training as much anymore either as some of her competitors, that there's a bit of rest heading towards the road season. Her big goal there is Paris-Roubaix. That's my observation, at least, that she's tired. I don't know how you saw that today.
I think indeed that it is, there is a decline there in form, and it's now, I think it's just a little bit harder to compensate sometimes for just being, technically sometimes a little bit lacking in certain sectors and stuff, but it was overall, it's not the motivation, right? I mean, with Brandt, it's always someone that if she's in a position to go for a podium or for a win, she will always try to make the most out of it. But it's realistic, as you say, if the training is is put on a low, and she is trying to just get through these races in a way, and that is obviously going to have an effect, and not a positive one, at least for these type of races. And I think if she's going to race next weekend as well, she will probably it could be even worse than it was. Sometimes it changes. With if a rider takes a little more rest, it can change for the better sometimes. But normally, it should be a decline that will only be worse, arguably, next week. So it will be interesting to see if she can complete the streak, I guess, because now the factors are not really playing in her favor.
Her streak today was saved by the puncture of Vandeputte. It was really realistic that Vandeputte would have ended in front of her. In the end, Casasola wins ahead of Ribeirol, Brandt, Betsema, Worst, Brouwers, Kant, Bakker, Krabbe and Kay. Bakker had a nasty crash. And for Worst, I have to say it was a good recovery ride. She was involved in a start crash, which wasn't her fault. Larissa Hartog got catapulted after some contact with, I don't really remember who it was, but she made contact with somebody, then tapped the rear wheel of Casasola and got catapulted into the fences. So Worst, she focused on the X2O trophy, securing her second place there and the prize money. I thought it was a decent ride. She could have probably competed considering her lap times, but it is what it is sometimes. Sometimes you're just out of luck in the start.
Yeah, we forgot to mention the emotional, somewhat emotional post-interview of Casasola, in which she mentioned the loss. It was the loss of Vito Di Tano, who was part of the Gurosetti team, their former team, and yeah, it looked like it really did something to her. It was Vito Di Tano was I think he was a 2-time amateur world champion, and yeah, he was very very much involved in that team, and I think that loss there, it was probably a loss of arguably 2 weeks ago. So yeah, it definitely was a special occasion for sure that she was able to pull off with the win. Maybe she was by that a little more motivated to try and go for the victory, and if it helped, it probably did in a way, and she was very obviously sad by the situation of what happened and the loss, but she was also in a way satisfied that she was able to give it a place and have that victory. And that was, for me at least, that was a special moment. So I think it was, I think it was worth to give it a highlight.
Definitely. I can't believe I forgot that I had even written it down on my piece of paper. It's a very nice gesture of her. It's about a week and a half ago that he passed away, and I find it a bit remarkable because I know the importance is there, right? So he was very, very influential in her former team, the Italian team. He played a big role there, having the influence, guiding the Italian riders with his experience. But still, you don't really see it that often that people of that age are still involved in the sport to such a degree, which is why you normally also don't see tributes like this. The mentor of Elie Iserbyt, in a way, is Mario de Klerk. He's a person who has a similar role to what Di Tano had. But de Klerk is, of course, much younger than Di Tano, so you don't see it. And that's, I think, what caused a bit of confusion in Belgium. They didn't realize that he played such an influential role in that team. I remember 2 or 3 years ago in Val di Sole, he was there in the snow with his boots, coaching in the pre-ride, hanging out at the truck of his team. It's a man who had a real passion for the sport, and as it's by now an Italian team, and it's still the biggest Italian team, but not as big as it used to be, it's out of the spotlight, and if you don't know it, then it can be a bit confusing, and you think, well, just a tribute to an Italian legend. That's what they said on the broadcast in Belgium. It's kind of as if Elie Iserbyt is giving an interview saying, oh, Albert van Damme, he was my hero, how come I'm so sad that he passed away, how could it happen, just 70 years old. that's, I feel, where a bit of that confusion comes from, which makes sense because you need to know to know the influence he had on the Italian team. But yeah, it was a beautiful gesture, and with that we can wrap up this double weekend. Casasola not racing next week. Issam will be there covering Oostmalle, but first a special nearly 2 hour long episode this weekend. No, this midweek actually. We already recorded it, in which we cover some historical aspects of cyclocross.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a very long one, but it was also, I think it was in a way quite enjoyable, at least from my side. And yeah, I think I definitely hope the listeners will give it a listen. It's long, but I think it's in a way also worth it. We go over quite a few things, and it's yeah, it has some value historically as well. As if you want to try and pick up a few things that you were maybe not aware of, it's definitely nice. And we share our opinions as well. So yeah, and then it's the last race weekend which is coming up then, and yeah, from there on it's all the focus will disappear from cyclocross, and it will all be focused more on the road, which is then starting. And yeah, that's the way it goes always with cyclocross, and then we come back slowly but surely somewhere again later this year. So yeah, it's all coming to an end.
We will record a season recap, and as said, we'll do some season reviews. Need to figure out the format, when, how much, also kind of how much interest there is. We'll do our classic stuff as always, but as said, we're gonna slowly but surely dwindle out of the season, go into easy recovery mode. Issam, thank you so much. One more, or two more in fact, to go. Thanks everyone for listening, and see you guys next week. Goodbye.